Picture this. A fishing captain turns his key one morning and nothing happens. His engine is dead. He's 40 miles from shore with a boat full of paying customers. He reaches for his phone to call his mechanic. The mechanic says 4 words that change everything. "I can't help you." Not because he doesn't want to, because he literally cannot touch this engine. The tools don't exist in his shop. The parts aren't in his warehouse. The computer software needed to diagnose the problem is locked behind a firewall halfway around the world. This is happening right now, and it's about to get much bigger. For 70 years, buying a boat motor was simple. You walked into a dealer, you picked Mercury, Yamaha, Honda, or Suzuki. The price was high, but you knew what you were getting. Service everywhere, parts available, mechanics who understood every bolt and wire. The system worked because everyone played by the same rules. Then, one company decided to ignore those rules completely. A Chinese engine maker just released a motor that costs half what American brands charge. But here's where it gets interesting. This isn't some cheap knockoff that breaks after a month. This engine is actually more advanced. It has features that American motors won't have for another 5 years. It's lighter, it's smarter, and it's turning the entire boating world upside down. Right now, dealers across America are facing an impossible choice. Sell these new motors and make incredible profits but risk losing everything if something goes wrong. Or stick with the old brands and watch their competitors steal their customers. Insurance companies are refusing to cover boats with these engines, mechanics are scared to work on them, but customers keep buying them anyway because the price is just too good to ignore. Here's what nobody saw coming. This isn't just about one company making cheaper engines, this is about what happens when an entire industry gets comfortable. When 4 companies control everything, prices go up every year, innovation slows down, nobody tries very hard because nobody has to. Then someone from outside shows up with something better and cheaper, and suddenly all those comfortable companies realize they have a serious problem. This story isn't really about boat motors. It's about what happens when you stop trying to improve because you think nobody can challenge you. It's about markets that worked one way for decades suddenly changing in months. It's about American companies that thought they were untouchable discovering they're not. The next 20 minutes will show you exactly how this happened. You'll see the warning signs everyone ignored. You'll meet the people caught in the middle. You'll understand why some of the biggest companies in boating are genuinely scared right now, because what's happening with boat motors today could happen to any industry tomorrow. And once you see how fast things can change, you'll never look at business the same way. Again, nobody paid attention when Parsun Heavy Industries showed up at the Shanghai Boat Show in 2024. The company had a small booth in the back corner. Most journalists walked right past. Industry experts barely glanced at their display. The few engineers who actually stopped to look at the specifications felt something change in their chest, a tightness, a realization that what they were seeing shouldn't be possible. The spec sheet told a story that didn't make sense according to everything the industry believed. 350 horsepower coming from an engine that weighed less than anything in its class. A price tag of $18,500. The comparable Mercury engine cost $42,000. Do the math on that for a second. You're getting the same power for less than half the money, and the engine weighs 30% less than what American companies were building. This wasn't a small improvement, this was a completely different approach to engineering. Parsun wasn't some brand new startup working out of a garage. They'd been manufacturing smaller motors for European customers since 2001. For 23 years, they'd been learning, studying, watching how the big companies operated, taking notes on every weakness and inefficiency. But this new engine represented something more significant. This was their announcement to the world that they'd figured it out. The company had done something smart. They hired engineers away from Volvo Penta, they recruited designers who'd worked at Honda Marine, they even convinced technology specialists from Mercury to switch sides. These weren't inexperienced builders copying someone else's work. These were the same people who designed the American engines everyone trusted. Behind all this stood something even bigger. The Chinese government had poured $4 billion into marine research and development since 2020. That's not a misprint. $4 billion focused specifically on building better boat motors. Compare that to what American companies spent during the same time. The difference is embarrassing. The first customers weren't Americans, they were Australians. And that makes perfect sense when you think about it. In Australia, distances are massive and fuel is expensive. Boat operators there care deeply about efficiency because every gallon of gas costs them real money. A charter captain named Mike Harrison decided to take a chance. He bought one of these Chinese engines for his backup boat. Not his main vessel where customers ride, his backup, just to test it. 6 months passed, the engine never failed once, not a single problem. But here's what really caught his attention. It burned 40% less fuel than his Yamaha motors. 40%? That's not a small difference. That's the difference between profit and loss on many trips. The engine also had diagnostic software that actually worked. It detected a cooling system problem before any damage occurred. The motor basically fixed itself by warning Harrison early enough to prevent a breakdown. Harrison didn't tell anyone what he'd discovered, he just quietly ordered 4 more engines. Because when you find something that gives you an advantage over your competition, you keep it quiet as long as possible. The real breakthrough wasn't about traditional engineering, it was about electronics and software. Parsun had built something the old companies kept promising but never actually delivered. Every engine came with artificial intelligence built into its brain. Not the fake kind of AI that's just a marketing term, real diagnostic software that could predict when parts were about to fail. The system learned how you used your boat and adjusted itself to run more efficiently. Each motor had satellite connectivity. That means the engine could literally update its own software while sitting at the dock. Like your phone getting updates, except this was a boat motor fixing its own problems and improving its own performance without anyone touching it. The engine housing used carbon fiber in places where American motors still used heavy steel, lighter weight, stronger materials, better performance. Mercury had been talking about these features for years. Yamaha had them on their development roadmap. But talking about innovation and actually delivering it are two very different things. In January of 2025, something unprecedented happened. Brunswick Corporation owns Mercury. They sent a memo to every single authorized dealer in North America. The message was direct and harsh. If you service Parsun engines, you lose your Mercury authorization immediately. Within 2 days, Yamaha sent the same message to their dealers. Suzuki followed a week later. The big companies were drawing a line in the sand. You're either with us or against us. No middle ground exists. Think about what this meant for boat dealers. These shops had spent decades building relationships with Mercury and Yamaha. Their mechanics were trained on these systems. Their parts inventory was designed around these brands. Their entire business model depended on maintaining those partnerships. Now they had to make an impossible choice. For 3 months, the people who bought these Chinese engines reported nothing but success. Fishing guides in Florida were documenting fuel savings that seemed too good to be true. Charter boat operators in the Keys were running full-day trips on half the fuel they'd budgeted for. Racing teams in Australia recorded the same speeds as Japanese engines while spending a fraction of the money. Online forums filled with cautious excitement, people started asking the question that terrified American manufacturers: could this actually be legitimate? Then April arrived and everything changed. A sport fishing boat lost power 40 miles off the coast of Tampa. The gearbox seal failed, salt water got into the lower unit, and contaminated the oil. The captain managed to limp back to shore using his backup engine. He was lucky. He made it home safely, but when he got to the dock, he discovered a problem that nobody had fully considered. Not a single mechanic within 500 miles would touch his Parsun engine. The diagnostic software was completely proprietary. You needed special tools that only existed in China. The nearest parts warehouse was in Vancouver, Canada. Basic components had a 3-week shipping time. 3 weeks. For parts that would arrive next day for a Mercury or Yamaha. A dealer named Jim Rodriguez, who runs a shop in Miami, found himself trapped. His customers were begging him to sell these engines. The profit margins were incredible. He could make more money on one Parsun than on 3 Mercuries, but the liability kept him awake at night. What if something breaks and he can't fix it? What if someone gets stranded? What if someone gets hurt? His business that he'd built over 30 years could disappear in a single lawsuit. Insurance companies started refusing to cover boats with Chinese outboards. Their reasoning was simple: unproven reliability, no service infrastructure, too much risk. The online forums that had been celebrating these engines suddenly turned skeptical. One post on a popular boating website summed up the growing concern perfectly. A user wrote that his Parsun died offshore and he spent 8 hours waiting for a tow. The comment section exploded into arguments between people defending their purchase and people saying they'd warned everyone this would happen. While American dealers worried about warranties and service problems, something remarkable was happening on the other side of the planet. By May of 2025, Parsun had captured 22% of the outboard motor market in Southeast Asia. That's not a typo. In 5 months, they took nearly a quarter of an entire regional market that had belonged to Japanese and American companies for generations. Nigeria ordered 5,000 engines for their government patrol boats. Brazil's largest boat manufacturer announced they were switching their entire production line to Parsun motors. Countries that had always bought American or Japanese were suddenly going Chinese. The global market was shifting and most Americans had no idea it was happening. Then the financial results came out and Wall Street paid attention fast. Mercury's quarterly earnings call sent their stock price down 8% in a single day. Profit margins that had held steady at 34% for an entire decade suddenly dropped to 19%. Read that again. Their profits got cut almost in half in one quarter. For the first time since World War II, American manufacturers were losing serious market share in boat motors. An industry that America had dominated for 70 years was slipping away. Yamaha announced layoffs at their Georgia factory. 12 dealerships across Florida and Texas either shut down completely or merged with competitors to survive. The unthinkable was actually happening. A technician named Tom Mitchell had worked on Mercury engines in Fort Lauderdale for 30 years. He knew every component, every seal, every quirk and trick for fixing problems quickly. He'd built a career on that knowledge. Now he watched younger mechanics with laptops diagnosing Chinese motors that he couldn't even open without voiding the warranty. Everything he'd learned over 3 decades was becoming useless. The specialized tools in his shop that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars couldn't work on these new engines. Mitchell wasn't alone. Thousands of marine technicians across America faced the same reality. Their expertise was obsolete, their tools were worthless, their experience didn't matter anymore. At the Miami International Boat Show in 2025, the change was impossible to ignore. The Mercury booth had always been the centerpiece of the entire show, the place where serious buyers spent their time. This year, it stood half empty. People walked through, grabbed some brochures, and kept moving. Across the aisle, crowds surrounded Parsun's display 3 people deep. Customers watched engines diagnose themselves on smartphone screens. They saw real-time fuel consumption data. They looked at price tags and had to check twice because the numbers seemed wrong. The gap between old and new technology was getting wider every month. While American manufacturers argued about tariffs and trade protection, Parsun announced their 2026 model, hydrogen hybrid technology with a 500-mile range, 60% lower emissions, and a price point that would destroy whatever profit margins American companies had left. The future wasn't coming anymore. It had already arrived, and it was being built in China. A professor from MIT's Marine Engineering Department named Sarah Chen had been warning the industry for years. She told them this wasn't about cheap labor anymore. That explanation was outdated and wrong. China had moved far beyond copying other people's designs. They'd invested $42 billion in marine research since 2020. That's more money than the United States had spent on marine research in the previous 20 years combined. They'd hired the best engineers from established companies by offering salaries that Western manufacturers refused to match. But money was only part of their advantage. The real power came from something called vertical integration. Parsun owned everything. The aluminum smelters, the microchip factories, every single component from raw materials to the finished engine came from facilities they controlled. When supply chains collapsed during the pandemic, American manufacturers waited months for parts. Parsun never stopped building engines, not for a single day. Mercury depended on dozens of different suppliers for parts. If one supplier had problems, production stopped. Parsun depended on nobody but themselves. They controlled the entire process from start to finish. An executive from Mercury spoke anonymously to a trade publication. He admitted what everyone already knew, but nobody wanted to say out loud. They'd seen this threat coming back in 2019. Internal reports had warned about Chinese investment in marine technology. Strategy meetings had discussed what to do about it. But quarterly earnings mattered more than 5-year plans. Stock buybacks took priority over research and development. Shareholders wanted bigger dividends today, not protection against competition that might arrive tomorrow. The patent numbers revealed just how badly American companies had fallen behind. In 2023 alone, Chinese companies filed 1,200 patents related to marine technology. American companies filed less than 300. While Mercury was refining fuel injection systems they'd been using, for 40 years, Parsun was partnering with battery companies to develop hybrid technology. While Yamaha made small improvements to existing designs, Parsun was integrating artificial intelligence and satellite connectivity. The economics were brutal but simple to understand. American manufacturers had maintained 40% profit margins because they could. 4 companies controlling the entire market meant prices went up every year, whether they innovated or not. Dealers had no alternatives. Customers had no real choices. The system worked perfectly until someone refused to play by those rules. Parsun didn't just offer a cheaper engine, they offered a better engine at a cheaper price. In business, that combination is almost impossible to beat. As of right now, 3 different scenarios are playing out at the same time. Congress is debating a 45% tariff on Chinese marine products. This might protect American manufacturers temporarily, but it would also double prices. For boat buyers, Mercury is racing to finish something called Project Lightning, their emergency electric outboard program scheduled for 2026. They're trying to leapfrog past the competition they ignored for too long, and Parsun is quietly building a manufacturing facility in Tijuana, Mexico, 60 miles from the California border, ready to avoid any trade restrictions by building engines in North America. An investment firm released a forecast that shocked the industry. By 2027, Chinese manufacturers will control 35% of the global outboard market. By 2030, that number could hit 50%. The report's conclusion was direct. American companies have 18 months to transform completely or face irrelevance. The era of comfortable control is finished. A veteran boat dealer in Houston who'd been selling boats for 40 years said something that stuck with me. He'd survived 2 recessions. He'd made it through the pandemic. He'd rebuilt after Hurricane Katrina destroyed his showroom. But this felt different. This wasn't a temporary crisis you could wait out. This was evolution, and the old companies were dinosaurs. Young customers don't care about brand heritage or tradition. They care about technology, efficiency, and price. Parsun delivers all 3. The question extends beyond boat motors. This is about what happens when protected industries meet real competition, when tradition confronts disruption, when Made in America costs twice as much and delivers half the innovation. The marine industry is just the beginning. The same forces are building in automotive, aerospace, and manufacturing. Maybe the real revolution isn't the engines themselves, it's what they represent. The end of assumptions, the price of comfort, the hard truth that in engineering, just like in nature, you either adapt or you disappear. The American marine industry stands at a decision point. One path leads to protection, tariffs, and slow decline. The other demands innovation, investment, and uncomfortable change. The next 18 months will show which path they choose. The clock is running, and the water doesn't wait for anyone.